Why would the president claim executive privilege unless there was something very, very important that he felt should not be made known to this committee and possibly to the public?
What could be so damning in those documents that they can't be given to us?
For the past year, you've been holding the Attorney General to an impossible standard. This whole idea, everybody, what's he hiding? Well, I don't think he's hiding a damn thing.
Why is it that President Obama is suddenly invoking executive privilege on documents that we were told yesterday they would be glad to give us?
The Attorney General, Eric Holder, voted in contempt. A contempt of Congress resolution passed the committee, the House Oversight Committee, along party lines, 23-17. The big news was that the president, the White House, invoked executive privilege today on these documents from Fast and Furious, the operation, the scandal we've been following for 18 months. Now, it's not unheard of. Presidents have invoked executive privilege many times before. As you look at back to Ronald Reagan, he invoked it 3 times. George H.W. Bush once. President Clinton 14 times. George W. Bush 6 times. This is the first time the president has invoked executive privilege. Let's bring in our panel. We'll start there. Bill Kristol, editor of the Weekly Standard. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor of The Hill. We welcome Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com and author of the book Fast and Furious, Barack Obama's Bloodiest Scandal and the Shameless Cover-Up, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Expanded panel tonight. Charles, will start with the executive privilege. Came as a shock to a lot of people on Capitol Hill today.
And it has several immediate effects. The first is, as you mentioned, the grapevine. There's no way that the mainstream media, which have studiously tried to ignore this, can't do that anymore. And in fact, as you pointed out, NBC, which has shown exactly 10 seconds of coverage of this on its evening news over the last year and a half, is not going to have to explain the whole thing, since the viewership has no idea what it's about. So number one, it becomes a huge national issue. Secondly, it involves the president. Not that he was involved in the actual communications, but he's the one who has to authorize the claim of executive privilege. Once he does that, clearly he's connected, even though it's not, it wasn't claimed on the grounds of presidential communication, which is the first way to do it. Nobody is saying it was the president who was, it was communications with the president which are now being protected. It's being claimed on a second level of executive deliberation, meaning something happened inside the Justice Department. But the final effect could be one that could hurt Republicans, because as you already heard from the talking points of Democrats in Congress, this will be characterized as another case of overreaching, obstructionism, opposition, blind opposition to the administration, and distraction from real economic legislation or activities. And that's the line that Democrats will take. It could, in fact, hurt the Republicans among some of the electorate.
Katie, you've been to or have seen almost every single hearing about Fast and Furious. Just a few moments ago, Senator Chuck Grassley released a letter he sent to the president in which he asked for a description of the scope of his executive privilege claim and asserts he wants to know exactly what documents this is covering. What's your sense of these developments today?
Well, the timing is interesting, because you can say that President Obama is trying to save his Attorney General from embarrassment in these documents that were requested. And keep in mind that the Oversight Committee wanted 70,000 documents, and they agreed to let the Justice Department submit 1,300 yesterday. Now, it's either President Obama is trying to delay this by invoking executive privilege and run it through the court system. Maybe it will be overturned. Or the White House had more involvement in Fast and Furious than they previously admitted. President Obama says he didn't know anything about this, but 3 of his national security advisors at the White House were getting information through emails about Fast and Furious, including detailed maps about where these guns are going in Mexico.
A.B., this was such a standoff, and this big meeting last night up on Capitol Hill with Congressman Issa and the Attorney General, and 18 months, they could have invoked executive privilege a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't know about the timing. They are claiming that they are citing it to protect deliberations within the executive branch, and that this would threaten the balance of power between the Congress and the executive branch. This, it should be noted, has happened before. Republicans today on Capitol Hill are insinuating that there is a cover-up and that the president is involved somehow in Fast and Furious. They have not produced any evidence. If they do, that's a very serious matter and a huge problem for the administration. But there have been instances in the past where executive privilege is invoked to protect communications or documents only at the Justice Department level. President Bush did so in December of 2001 with documents having to do with an FBI investigation. It's not the first time this has happened. Doesn't mean that the West Wing is involved. That will be a discussion of debate over the coming days. Of course, the timing of it, whether or not there was some sort of cover-up. And as I said, if something is revealed, that's a problem. But they are claiming that this is a bridge too far, that these were documents that were supposed to be sealed, and that if revealed and shared would throw off the balance of power. It is their, as you pointed out, the right of presidents to do so, and presidents in recent times have used it a lot.
Bill.
Yeah, I mean, presidents can assert executive privilege, and then you can go to the courts and have this endless process, and it usually takes months and months to work out. So that if this were the end of it, it would run past the election. And in a way, I do think the House leadership is very sensitive to the point Charles raised, which is so far the Republicans are on the right side of this. They have tried to get more information about a terrible Justice Department operation gone terribly wrong, in which an American border agent was killed, in which many Mexicans were probably killed because of these guns, and which the Justice Department was not forthright about. I mean, no one denies that. The Justice Department itself has withdrawn its February 4th letter, and Attorney General Holder's had to correct his testimony. So up till now, I think Republicans can honestly say on the Hill, if it weren't for our investigating, and if it weren't for some media organizations investigating and not others, we would know much less about this than we should know. I do think the Speaker is going to not want to have the House, would prefer not to have the House hold Eric Holder in contempt. That does look more like a personal vendetta somehow against the Attorney General. And I would suspect over the next week they'll try to resume negotiations. Because in a way, the Republicans are better off, and I think the country's better off, having more hearings, getting more testimony, getting the documents you can get. What do you really learn by holding the Attorney General in contempt? Nothing happens as a result. It just goes into an endless court process.
We should point out, and you mentioned Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, another agent was killed, ICE agent Jaime Zapata, gunned down on a Mexican highway, and the ATF traced one of the guns there, they believe, to a sale in Texas that might fall under Operation Fast and Furious. But Charles, the Terry family today issues this statement that's very firm. I mean, Attorney General Eric Holder's refusal to fully disclose the documents associated with Operation Fast and Furious and President Obama's assertion of executive privilege serves to compound this tragedy. It denies the Terry family and the American people the truth. Our son lost his life protecting this nation. It is very disappointing that we are now faced with an administration that seems more concerned with protecting themselves rather than revealing the truth behind Operation Fast and Furious. I mean, people in Arizona, at least, are following this really closely.
Well, that's what makes what would ordinarily be, and there are many of these, Washington scandals, potential cover-ups, into a tragedy. I mean, there are 2 American agents, honorable men in the service of their country, who are dead, in part at least as a result of this operation. So I think it gives it added valence, added emotional impact. And when the family says, we want to know, it does make the administration look like it's covering up. Remember, the documents that it is refusing to reveal, the Justice Department itself says, are not documents about the operation, but about the communications within the department on how to respond to the investigation, which sounds like cover-up.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, Katie, and the specifics there and the politics, more on the politics in just a moment.
There's been a tendency on the part of this administration to try to hide behind executive privilege every time there's something a little shaky that's taking place. And I think, you know, the administration would be best served by coming clean on this.
It's hard for me to comprehend how logically, politically, realistically, constitutionally, the president could do this. It's like saying, I'm king.
Well, then Senator Obama and Senator Reid back in 2007 commenting on the Bush administration invoking executive privilege back then about a U.S. attorney investigation. We're back with the panel. Bill, those sound bites are striking now.
Yeah, they are. Not the first time that President Obama is doing something that, as senator, he thought was just unconscionable, and how could you do that? But I suppose he's decided that transparency is a little less important than he would claim, preserving some kind of, I guess, cloak of secrecy over internal administration deliberations. But I think, as we said on the first panel, what is striking about this is not sensitive national security deliberations. These are not White House staffers, presumably, maybe they are, talking with the Justice Department. At least it's, as presented, it's internal Justice Department discussions about how to respond to a congressional investigation and to media inquiries. Some of it could be embarrassing, but is it really something that the president has to assert executive privilege over?
Because really, Katie, they're looking for these emails or documents after February 2011, when the Justice Department has then said they did not, the ATF did not let guns walk. Later, in 2011, they have to retract that statement. They're looking for the documents in between that time. I want to put up this quote from the Attorney General in reaction to this hearing today and the vote in the committee for contempt. He said, Chairman Issa has chosen to use his authority to take an extraordinary, unprecedented, and entirely unnecessary action intended to provoke an avoidable conflict between Congress and the executive branch. When Chairman Issa later began his own investigation, he goes on to say, I made it clear the department would cooperate with all appropriate oversight requests while still adhering to our legal obligations to protect information involving ongoing law enforcement investigations, legally protected grand jury material, and other sensitive information whose disclosure would endanger the American people and our agents investigating open cases. The American people deserve better. Question is, does that fall into what he's talking about here?
I'm not sure. I mean, yesterday, the Attorney General was supposed to meet with Congressman, Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Darrell Issa, and he was going to come forth with these 1,300 documents and turn them over. But instead, he came to the meeting and said, I will give you these documents and brief you on them so long as you drop your congressional investigation into Fast and Furious. And so it's been 18 months. Senator Grassley has been investigating this from the Senate side. Chairman Issa has been at this, since last year. And they've really come to an impasse in terms of the documents that they've asked for. And once again, they asked for 70,000 documents. They narrowed it down to 1,300, and the Attorney General failed to deliver.
Is it your suspicion that this goes somewhere into the White House at some level?
I think so. Like I said earlier, I mean, it's either the White House had more involvement in this than they have admitted before. If you go back to the beginning of the Obama administration, President Obama gave his Attorney General direct orders to reassess gun trafficking policy on the border. He also told this to Janet Napolitano, Homeland Security Secretary, and they made gun trafficking and the stopping of the drug cartels down there a top priority. And you fast forward to today, and they clearly don't want the American public to see what's going on with these communications.
A.B. Charles touched on the politics of this, and obviously it could go both ways. Your thoughts on how it plays?
Yeah, I think the politics are mixed. I mean, I think that what you see happening in the House among Republicans was an initial resistance to this, going full speed ahead. We said last week, Charles and I agreed last week, we thought we'd see a committee vote for contempt, not likely a full House vote. Now we're looking at a full House vote. They're under enormous pressure, the leadership is, from their conference to go through with this, and members who are looking for what they're calling a face-saving deal, hope that in the coming days something could materialize to stop this. But it looks like we'll see a contempt vote. I don't know that independent voters remember that Democrats, when they were in charge, held Harriet Miers, Bush's chief of staff, or a top advisor to President Bush and legal counsel to President Bush, in contempt in the Congress. I don't know that they paid for it politically. There are so few remaining persuadable voters in this election that are so worried about the economy. I do not think they're paying attention to this. I think the people that follow this story are people who are going to vote against the president. I don't think this is going to change any minds. I think people in recent memory have seen way too many congressional oversight investigations and attorneys general in the crosshairs of Congress in recent memory. And I think, as I said, those who are left unpersuaded are going to make up their minds about the economy. And right now, President Obama is the underdog.
Charles.
Look, I think A.B. touched upon the disconnect between what Democrats said about this kind of investigation under Bush and what they're saying now. But there's a second one, more recent disconnect, which is in the Holder statement. The rest of that statement, he says, I've cooperated with their requests, except that I won't make disclosures that would endanger the American people or our agents in the field. Well, this administration that has just leaked everything you want to know about Stuxnet, the secret war against Iran, has just leaked details about the drone war, about the double agent in Yemen, about all kinds of things, including this morning, front page of the Washington Post, the flame virus, the other one that's now active. And it's done it, not a leak, but a flood. And what does that have in common? It's a way to show how strong and assertive the administration is in foreign affairs. This might show negatively on the administration. That's the only difference. If it's national security, then they have no regard for secrets, and here all of a sudden, extremely guarded. It makes you wonder what they're hiding.
Panel, thank you. Katie, thanks for joining us. That's it for the panel, but stay tuned.